All right. Wonderful. Welcome back and namaskar. Welcome to this session. It is our distinct honor to welcome back Padma Shri Professor Subhash Kak to today's distinguished lecture. It's a lecture we call him to give every year. Today's topic is fascinating. Today, he's going to talk to us about the Vedic view of consciousness in light of modern mathematics, science, and AI research. I can't, I can scarcely think, even going through history, scarcely think of a better person to request to give this talk. Professor Kak is an expert in computing, in quantum computing, mathematical research. He writes on science topics. His last paper that he sent over was on e-dimensional universe. So, and he's an expert in Indian history, in the Vedas, and writes a lot of cross articles, picking from one side and commenting on another. So it's always very fascinating to hear Professor Kak's talk. Consciousness is a very difficult topic in modern physics because it's hard to explain, and especially the foundations of modern science are eliminate the sort of the observer in most cases. And so what happens is consciousness is something that we don't talk about at least when going through school, we were not taught about consciousness. But from the Hindu tradition, we have a lot of research, a lot of insight into the self. And so the question we have for Professor Kak today is, how do you now look at the Vedic view of consciousness in light of all the research that's going into AI, into quantum computing, and into everything else that you're seeing around? So with that, I'd like to welcome Professor Kak. And Kailash, do you want to say a few words to welcome Professor Kak as well?
Yes, it's a great privilege. From the founding of HCI, he's been a great supporter, participation, his goodwill and blessings and all those things are always there. And it's been a delight, and we really appreciate as I said, each class, one of the more memorable lectures happens to be his consistently. So I just want to know that we are appreciated by everyone here. And so thank you again for taking the time for us. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Gaurav ji. Thank you, Kailash ji, for the introduction. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak on consciousness, which is the heart of Hinduism. Consciousness as mystery, because if you look at the Vedas, they define themselves as Atma Vidya. Atma Vidya means the science of consciousness. Or in the great Shaivism, Kashmir Shaivism classic, Shiva Sutra, the very first sutra is Chaitanyam Atma, that Chaitana, awareness, itself is Atman. So now, of course, there are a lot of misconceptions about Hinduism which are tied up with this whole colonial project where Western European scholars define Hinduism for the layperson in a manner which doesn't do justice to it. In fact, the great English Sri Lankan scholar, in my view, one of the greatest scholars of Hinduism of the past 150 years, who died exactly 100 years ago. I'm sorry, but died in 1947, not exactly 100 years ago, 1947, the year India became independent. Ananda Kumaraswamy, in his book, Hinduism and Buddhism, and I'm going to paraphrase him, he says that for 100 or 150 years, European scholars have been writing on Hinduism, and literally whatever they've written on it can be in definitive terms be expressed as wrong. Not exactly his words. You can see the words in one of my essays where I quote him, or go directly to his book, Hinduism and Buddhism, wonderful book, which is on the internet as well. So what we have been told about Hinduism is naive or half-truths, and And we have, because Indian Constitution does not allow Hinduism to be taught in the school, and traditionally, of course, the temples serve as places where people received education. In fact, Dharampal's famous book, The Beautiful Tree, speaks of how literacy in India before the coming of the British was at least around 60–70%, and all communities were represented. This is the statistics that the British Superintendents of Education assembled before the English decided to completely destroy that education system. And now we have the new system, but certainly after independence, schools are not supposed to teach anything about Hinduism or any other religion, although minority schools can teach their religion. But what's fascinating here is that prior to this, whatever sciences are a part of the Indian tradition were lumped into the religion category. So we have amazingly, in the last 70 years, deprived ourselves of knowledge of our own sciences. And as any good scholar of the Indian subcontinent will tell you, that first of all, the number of Sanskrit texts that we have from the ancient and medieval times exceed those in all the other languages combined, and many of them, or most of them, have still not been translated. And a large part of those texts were scientific. They were of one, not just Atma Vidya, but also representation of Atma Vidya through categories of the mind. Because as we know, the model is that you have the Atman, which is the same in every sentient being, the same Purush, irrespective of what their background is. The same Purush resides within each person, but our mind, which is fashioned by our conditioning and culture and education, and perhaps the personality that we bring when we are born, because each one of us has some aspects which are unique. So we then view the reality through those categories, and each of those categories, therefore, becomes a discipline in itself. And for example, we had so many texts on the arts, aesthetics, sculpture, Vishnu Dharmottara Puran, for example, philosophy, darshanas. You have 6 darshanas, which 6 classical darshanas, which are Purva Mimamsa, deal with logic and ritual and experience of life as it is. Then Nyaya, which is logic, Vaisheshika, which is logic, so applied to materiality, so it's physics. Then you have Sankhya, which are abstract categories through which we understand reality. And then on the other side is yoga. Yoga is the lived experience for each individual and lived experience of Hinduism. So yoga is the heart of Hinduism. Not surprising at all, even though people don't always acknowledge it. You look at the great classic, the Bhagavad Gita, and what is it? It's all about different kinds of yoga. And of course, you also have Patanjali's yoga, which presents a certain specific formulation. So, and then we have Vedanta, which is the overarching theory of reality. So these are all sciences, and these are sciences of consciousness by itself, which is Vedanta or Shaivism. In fact, what Vedanta and Shaivism are, 2 different ways of looking at consciousness. In Shankara's Vedanta, there is emphasis on the transitoriness of this world, Jagat Mithya, Satyam Brahma, Brahma Satyam, that only Brahman is one immutable category. And therefore, perhaps more of an emphasis on pursuit of knowledge for what it is, one's own path of discovery. While Kashmir Shaivism, and I already quoted Chaitanya Atma as the very first sutra, is where this whole embodied reality itself is the body of Shiva. Well, we can speak of this dichotomy of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is consciousness, and Shakti is materiality through which consciousness gets manifested, or Prakasha and Vimarsha. Vimarsha is the reflection of Prakasha. Shiva is Prakasha, light. Vimarsha is the reflection of that light within the mind or the brain, depending upon which perspective you want to look at it. And one's journeying, which takes one to all kinds of incredible anubhutis, incredible perspectives and understandings and intuitions, is journeying to the point where Prakash and Vimarsh come together. It's that boundary where one merges into the other. And because without Vimarsh, Prakash is of no use. You know, Prakash is just light. Prakash by itself cannot do anything. And it's absolutely incredible. You know, I cannot communicate to you the extraordinariness of all of this. And also my extraordinary dismay that we in the last 70 years have completely made generations of Indians oblivious of all of this knowledge. They have no clue, not even our scientists. You know, a few years ago, I translated Vaisheshika Sutra of Kannada's incredible book. It has even the laws of motion. Well, 2 of the 3 Newton's laws of motion, it's almost exactly in the same words. And it also speaks of, well, you know, just look at this, how extraordinary it is. It says that all the properties that you experience in this world are a consequence of substances, which is dravyas, their properties, which are gunas, and their karman, which is motion. That everything, which is absolutely modern, everything that you have in this universe in terms of properties of material universe is a consequence of substances, their qualities, their gunas, and their motion. But then it also says, what we abstract of it, or what we as individuals see out of it, comes from another triangular matrix. And this triangular matrix consists of Samanya, Vishesha. In fact, the word Vaisheshika comes from Vishesha. Samanya, which is universal. There's some universality in our understanding. For example, laws should be the same irrespective of which direction you're looking at a body. You know, that's a universal law. Invariances in modern physics parlance. So you have Samanya, you have Vishesha, and then you have Samavaya. Samavaya is that meeting point of the individual consciousness with the physical system. It's with a physical system if you're looking at an outside system, but we are paradoxically both within and without in our own minds. Our mind is outside of us, outside of the self, but it's also within us. So how we come together, that samavaya, that meeting point, is what gives us directionality in terms of our understanding. I can only tell you that these are extremely subtle things, and they are absolutely beautiful. Now, there is in quantum mechanics, as Gaurav ji told you, that I also do quantum physics. And one of the world's leading quantum physicists of the past 50, 70 years, a good friend of mine who passed away last year, George Sudarshan, in 1970s, he came up with an understanding or an explanation of how the observer interacts with the observed. This has been one of the major problems of quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, everything is totally deterministic by evolution through Schrodinger's equation, excepting when the observer or the system interacts with it, which is when a collapse of the state function takes place. The, also stepping a little further back, the creator of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, himself credited the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, for his discovery of superposition as the fundamental principle of quantum mechanics. And as you know, quantum mechanics underlies all of modern science. So an amazing thing where we already have a connection. So what George Sudarshan said that, look, you can, and he established it mathematically, you can just by observation freeze or steer the state of a physical system to whatever you want. So in other words, consciousness can steer a system because, you know, an old puzzle has been that if consciousness is a category different from physical reality, then how do these two categories intersect, right? So what George was able to show that you can, and he called it the quantum Zeno effect, as a tipping of the hat to Zeno. What does, you know, Zeno has nothing to do with it. So if you observe it in a particular way, you can steer the system. Now, this is something that's been a part of the Vedic tradition for a long time. As you know, in the Sri Chakra, which is in Sri Vidya, Sri Chakra is a representation of the inner cosmos. So you have these 9 triangles, which make so many smaller triangles and so on. So when one journeys within to the mind, you cross certain boundaries, and this is all sort of esoteric. We can't talk about the details out here. So right in the middle, as a bindu is Shiva, and in fact in the Puja, Shakti Puja, or in Durga Puja in Bengal, Shiva is shown as lifeless, literally lifeless, and you have the goddess. And the purpose, the subtle meaning of that is that the more you explore light, because you can only do vimarsh on light, you only have tools related to materiality, which are a part of your mind, to investigate light. You cannot ordinarily see light by light, right? And therefore, Shiva, the more you look for it, seems to recede further and further, so that all you can see is only Shakti. And that's why, you know, the goddess is supreme. Ultimately, in order to reach Shiva, you have to go through goddess. And even Shankara, in his Saundarya Lahari, acknowledged it, even though, you know, he was speaking of consciousness or in the most abstract form. So just to draw some broad summary out here, Hinduism is the most subtle approach to reality, and now one might wonder, and this is where there's a lot of pushback, is say, isn't that crazy? How could people 2,000 years ago have known any of this? And because the sympathetic scholars who have examined it, sympathetic scholars meaning open-minded scholars from the West, they are absolutely bowled over. And the answer to that is that, look, ultimately the only true reality that is consciousness. We have bodies, but you know, when I see you, for example, on the screen, or even in the same room, your spouse and your children, we don't see them in physical terms. They get projected in our consciousness. So consciousness is, or the case could be made, consciousness is the fundamental reality. And all of our knowledge also resides in our consciousness. And so it's not inconceivable that having looked through this question with the utmost clarity, as the rishis did, that they came up with insights which seem to be of value even now. But of course, this is what sets you up for opposition by attack by a lot of people who say that this is Hindu supremacism. There was this conference just last month, dismantling Hindutva, global Hindutva or something, where one of the things that was pointed out, hey, this is bizarre. How are the Hindus talking about, being consistent with science and of a tradition which already has a lot of science within? And I think the real problem is that Hindus themselves literally know nothing about Hindu sciences because they have not been told. It's not a part of the curriculum. It's not easy to find details, excepting if you are connected to it through a teacher, and there are not too many such neat teachers who are knowledgeable. So there are all of these problems, but it is true that all of our knowledge resides in consciousness, and by examining consciousness itself, which is what sadhana is ultimately all about, because you go to the heart of the consciousness not through just one path. When you talk of ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti, that there are many different paths. Sat is one reality because it's transcendent. So depending upon which lens you approach it, you will emphasize one thing or the other. And that's why the path to the heart of Hinduism is through different kinds of sadhana. It could be through the arts, it could be through dance or painting or literature, through beauty, through aesthetics, which is what a lot of Indian traditions emphasized, aesthetics, or even in the puja, aesthetics of one kind or the other. Or it could be through analysis, through vishleshan, through nyaya, through tattva gyan or whatever. So you can do it in so many different ways, or through the modern sciences. You can also do it through the modern sciences. Modern sciences are fine too. They all represent what is called apara vidya. In Mundak Upanishad speaks of two kinds of vidyas, apara and para. Apara are the sciences of things that can be spoken about, namely about things, because if there is a thing, you can view it, you can see what its gunas or properties are, and you can see how it unfolds. And that's what, say, physics is, or chemistry is, biology is. So these are all apara vidyas. Or you can even study language, which is what, say, Panini did. Or you can study society, and you can speak of different ways societies evolve and go up and down. Or you can also speak, fascinatingly, and this is right now, it just came to my mind, this horrific murder that took place in Sialkot 2 or 3 days ago of this Sri Lankan manager, because he tore off a poster in front of his factory, and because that poster had something in Arabic, people thought that was blasphemy, so they dragged him out, they beat him up, and then they burned him alive. So this brings you to one general psychological truth, which Hindu sciences talk about. And this psychological truth is that human beings are also pashu. They are like domesticated animals. So what is the property of a pashu, or what is the characteristic of a pashu? The characteristic of a pashu is that even a giant elephant or horse, a big horse, can be led by even a child, because a pashu can be led to wherever the master takes the person, right? And so, in other words, human beings generally are like animals. We are animals. We are all animals. And so we are bound by instinct and by culture, and that's called pasha, pasha meaning bindings, to behavior of one kind or the other. No different, say, from ants, an ant colony, or lemmings, or whatever else. So we are like that. So we become, and this is the heart of Hinduism, we become free only if we find Shiva within us, or Pashupati. Here we are talking about Pashu. Pasha, and the Pashupati within us, who's Shiva, because then we become Shiva, because each one of us is Shiva. It's nothing to do with sex and gender, all this craziness that we read about Hinduism by South Asian faculty and everybody else. It's so ridiculous. I can't tell you how silly it all is. So this is what it is. It is the path of freedom, path of mastery for every individual. For every individual, it's equal for every individual. And so what Hinduism then did, so this is the science of consciousness, and this science has paradoxical aspects. There's no ideology. This is the problem with academic stuff. Academic stuff is that you have to have a certain ideological framework to dissect a subject. But reality or life is beyond ideology. In life, everybody's life, opposites inhere at the same time. In life itself, consciousness itself is a dance between flow and death. That's why one of the great teachers in Kathopanishad, for example, is Yama, right? Yama is death. Or in the Shaivite tradition, Shiva himself, as Bhairav, represents death. And that is, you have the great Kala Bhairav temple, for example, in Ujjain. So death, so it's a dance. That doesn't mean that you're worshiping death. This is how you learn how to make that dance between these opposites, because it's that beautiful balance between these opposites that helps you find a certain place for yourself, for which you are uniquely you're uniquely created. You are here for something absolutely amazing. You meaning every human being, and they are prevented, or almost everybody is prevented by their culture, by the conditioning, by the whole world, by the system. It beats you down like we beat down a free horse until he gets domesticated, unless he converts himself into a pashu. So we are born free, but just as we break horses, we also break ourselves and our children and everybody else, and then we are not free anymore. So the whole challenge then is how to find that balance. And you find that balance in a constructive way. And once one does that, all kinds of wonderful things happen, because that's when the infinite potential that resides within well, Brahman consciousness is the thing out of which everything emerges, which is the Indian view. How do we then get access to it? Because we as Shivoham, as Shiva, then we have access to all of this stuff. Now it's sort of complicated. How do you explain it? You can certainly explain it in classes, in schools, through different perspectives, because that's how the various darshanas did it. I mean, you could either use logic, you can analyze language, which is what the Vaiyakarans, when you just examine etymologies and words, for which there was an amazing tradition in India going all the way back to Nirukta. So one did that, or one can do it so many different ways, and perhaps it can be done. In fact, there is one country in the world, namely Indonesia, where every Hindu is right from the first grade onwards. And I was looking at the curriculum just the other day. From first grade to 12th grade, there is a course where different aspects of Hinduism are taught. And as you know, the whole story of Hinduism in Indonesia, when Indonesia became free, they said they were going to, as an Islamic country, they said we are going to accept as valid religion only religions of the book. So the Hindu community, which was mainly concentrated in Bali, they got together and they said, okay, this is how we are going to cast Hinduism, CAST, cast Hinduism, so that Vedas are our book, Vyasa is our prophet because Vyasa arranged the Vedas, or he's supposed to be the author of the Mahabharata. So he's our prophet because they wanted a book, a prophet, and various other things, that this is what we do. So now I'm not saying that what they did was the perfect way to do it, but certainly it's been done, and it's not been done in India. So in India, every generation there is this fight, and the whole school system and the college system generates or creates these graduates who are raised on what one might call Hindu phobia, and then they are Hindu phobic and they hate all this. And then we have this big struggle. Well, how do we bring them back in? Now, of course, it doesn't happen to everybody. It doesn't happen to those people who have a very strong supportive environment at home. And another thing that I tweeted this morning was this article in Scientific American blogs based on research, which shows that if you do Sanskrit chanting, and this is called the Sanskrit effect, if you do chanting, certain cognitive areas, certain areas in your brain related to cognitive function actually become larger. So you apparently become smarter. Now, of course, there are those like Benson who said, well, it doesn't really matter what you chant. So long as you chant, it helps you. But in my view, chanting plus knowing what you're chanting is what gives you an edge. And that's why there are those who have had this tradition at home, and that tradition has really strengthened people in their lives, in their creativity, because this is where these are the ones who have not been hurt by the government controlled education of India. And the government controlled not only education, but also, as you know, of the temples, of everything. And now they want to tax, I believe in Bihar, there is a proposal to tax every temple 4%, even if it's a temple in your own home. It's a bizarre situation. The more one thinks of what's going on in India, sometimes one wonders that the place where this most extraordinary tradition, most truly extraordinary tradition, totally consistent with science, in fact, providing, in my view, having the capacity to provide the insights that are necessary to take science beyond the crisis point where it has reached right now. So what is the crisis point? This is the other side of consciousness from modern scientific perspective. Well, firstly, let me talk about computer science. A computer is not conscious while the brain machine is conscious. And now computer scientists want to ultimately create a conscious machine if that is possible. In fact, as part of a DARPA funded major project with 20-30 leading scientists of the US from various disciplines, including physics, computer science, neuroscience, philosophy, and managers from DoD and so on, to ask the question whether computers of the future will become conscious. And those who were from computer science or from where you're not really looking at reality in a very deep level, which is sometimes what physicists do, because physicists in other fields, you take a lot of the stuff for granted. So some of these people really believe that computers eventually will become conscious once the various modules inside the brain have all been embodied in computer hardware. So they say that somehow consciousness will emerge. So there were many people in these series of meetings, week-long meetings that we had at many places in Europe and the US, who believe that eventually computers will become conscious, which I think is not going to happen. And quantum theorists certainly did not accept it. And the best neuroscientists and some of the leading ones I know personally, like Carl Pribram, for example, who passed away 2 or 3 years ago, they do recognize that there's no simple way to look at consciousness inside the brain, because there is no single place in the brain which is a correlate of consciousness. Depending upon what you do and when you're doing conscious tasks, different points of the, or different places in the brain light up. There's no single place. It doesn't reside in any single piece of neural hardware, if I may use that term, inside the brain. So this is a challenge, and this is the reason why so much of interest in consciousness. So where does consciousness coming from? And this is the CS perspective. The physics perspective is the most interesting one, and I've had occasion, or I've had the good fortune to contribute to this recently, which is that 99.5% of the observable of the universe, well, all our theories explain only 0.5% of the universe. 0.5%. Just think about it. 96% is dark matter and dark energy, and 3.5% is interstellar gases. So there's only 0.5% left. So physicists cannot explain in cosmology why stars and galaxies are going at the speeds that they are, and you can't explain them using either Newtonian gravitation or Einstein's gravitation. That's why they have to imagine dark matter, which is because if dark matter is concentrated at some places, then you could probably explain. This is just a hope. And then 25 years ago, they discovered that the universe, the expansion is actually accelerating. It's not, people knew for a long time that it was expanding. And for that, the idea was that there was a primal Big Bang, an explosion, and that's why things are expanding. But now they're finding that this expansion is actually accelerated a few billion years ago. And so for this, they have to incorporate or call the possibility of what is called dark energy. It's dark energy, but there's no stretch of evidence, no iota of evidence, either for dark matter or dark energy. So my own take on this is that possibly bringing in the observer once again in new ways would resolve it, just as the mystery 120 years ago, before quantum mechanics was born, where people could not understand the stability of the atom, you know, where we have the negatively charged electrons and the positively charged nucleus. They couldn't understand why the electrons just don't fall into the nucleus. And in fact, that it was for that quantum mechanics had to be invented. So my own take is that perhaps the way we've been defining physical reality, and just to be very brief about it, there's a big discrepancy in the Hubble speed based on two different methods. And the Hubble speed is the rate at which the universe is expanding. And there is this discrepancy has persisted for a long time, even though cosmologists and astronomers have invested a lot of energy. And it so turns out that if you were to argue that physical space is not like a container, you know, this Cartesian system, it's a three-dimensional system in which the physical universe is placed, objects are placed. If it's not a container, but the physical space itself is e-dimensional, and this is what Gauravji mentioned in the beginning, is e-dimensional because e-dimensionality is optimal. There is a mathematical theorem which shows that e-dimensionality is actually optimal, and everything in the universe, physical universe, is optimal. If the universe is e-dimensional, then all kinds of things become apparent. Firstly, you can see why things are fractal. Those of you who know, who heard about fractal behavior, you know, self-similar behavior, like a broccoli or plants or flowers of different kinds. So, or galaxies. So why you can explain that, and you are also able to find out a solution, a resolution to this discrepancy. And there are many other possibilities. In fact, I had a just last week, I had a new paper accepted where I show that this e-dimensionality is able to explain the details of the structure of the genetic code. So that this e-dimensionality is not just in the physical space, because it's a mathematical theorem that all optimal representation has got to be e-dimensional. So in other words, without belaboring this point, that it appears to me that just as the rishis of yore had suggested, and I do suggest to you that you might want to take a look at Kannada's Vaisheshika Sutras, and this is a book which you can download from the internet, amazon.com. It's called, I believe, Matter and Mind. I translated the sutras and with an introduction. You'll see that the whole approach to reality is so beautifully modern, because, you know, when we say that the world is three-dimensional, well, we don't experience the world as three-dimensional. At its deepest level, all that we experience the world is through our senses. And so it's the senses which ultimately then it's projected by the senses into this feeling of three-dimensionality, because terrestrially, to a large extent, it is three-dimensional. Let me step back, because I see that I've almost done 45 minutes. Let me step back and try to tie up some loose ends. Consciousness is the frontier of all of science. It's frontier of all of science and technology, because that's where computers of the future want, or their designers want them to be conscious, so that they are autonomous, so that human beings have to do less and less. But whether they are autonomous or not, human beings will have to do less and less, because not conscious computers will be doing most of the stuff, because in most of the things that we do in our life, we don't have to use consciousness. We use intelligence. Computers can also be intelligent, right? They can be as intelligent as we are, and therefore most of our jobs will go away anyway. And I think in order to prepare the next generation for being the leaders of the world, if we are able to tell them or communicate to them the mystery of consciousness and the amazing sophistication of its understanding that evolved, because all of Hinduism, as I told you, is Atma Vidya, is the science of consciousness. And of course, there are certain other things which are societal, which are not the heart of the very heart of the tradition. And in fact, if you were to ask me, what about, I did mention the goddess, how in order to go to the very essence of what consciousness is, you have to go through the goddess, you have to go through Vimarsha, you know, you have Prakash and Vimarsha. But then you might say, what about Shiva and Vishnu? What is the difference? Now, of course, there are two different ways of looking at it. Vishnu is freedom, and Vishnu is consciousness as a principle, and sorry, Shiva, and Vishnu is the moral law. But this is speaking broadly, but within the Bhagavad Gita, I think it's 15.15, Krishna mentions how I am Smriti, Gyan, and Apohan. Smriti meaning memory, knowledge, and Apohan is forgetting. So these are three aspects of our interaction with reality. That first of all, we perceive reality, from which Smriti arises, and from there, through a mysterious process, because our mind has that capacity, because Shiva is within us, we obtain knowledge, Jnana, and then we get that as a glimpse, and then there is forgetting, which is Apohan. Now, in the commentary on the Shiva Sutra by Utpal Deva, what the triad is represented as Jnana first, Smriti later, and Apohan the third one. And this is really a distinction between the Shaivite view and the Vaishnavite view. In the Shaivite view, the first thing that happens is that knowledge, is that intuition. And with that intuition, these are only ways of talking about the same mystery. Through that intuition, then we are able to make sense of all that we perceive, from which Smriti arises. And then we still have Apohan, we have forgetting, and therefore then our other correlates in our mind guide us, and the very fact that we are also Pashu to a certain extent, guide us through our interactions with the world in different ways. So let me speak of a few challenges that there are. The first challenge is, how do we keep this alive? Well, there are sometimes one despairs, but at other times one knows that with the freeing of the control by gatekeepers, as in universities or in elite publishers and media, now we have the social media that's opened up so many doors, so people can get connected. But then even with that, something more needs to be done, more organization, because by its very nature, Hinduism is freedom, is not organizing, because everybody is on their own path, on their journey, and they're at different place. At some place, they might see themselves more as in the same way as in a body-centric view, as in the West. The Western view, even the scientific view, excepting if you are doing research as in quantum mechanics, is mainly body-centric. Now, the body-centric view is good as a part of journeying at certain point in your life, so long as you know that after a certain point, you will look at the deeper levels of the very fount of your experience, namely your consciousness. But if you believe that fount doesn't exist, as is true for many people in the West, then you can explain why, for example, last year, 2020, 100,000 Americans died of drug overdose. Why are young people killing themselves? Or maybe they're not necessarily consciously killing themselves, but they're so addicted that they have no control over what they're ingesting. And there's a lot of good stuff and bad stuff, and then they die. 100,000 people. Some of them, they are in the best of health, they are young, they're married, they have young children, beautiful children, and they have no control. Why? Because the West tells you that there isn't anything beyond your body. And as we know, the body is nashvar, the body is going to go away. And that's a source of great despair. Now, so this is a challenge. How do we keep it alive? Now, what we need is, we need some mechanisms, and HCI is one of them, but we need even more than that. Maybe the temples of this country could come together and say that we are going to create an educational program for people to do their PhD or research, and we'll get it accredited, and students would come, and it's an informal setting, or they could do it over the internet. And if that were done, maybe that could become a model for people in India, because India is truly, totally in the grips of the colonial control, even now, much worse than was the case in 1947, because now it's absolutely in all education, the textbook materials, their temples are in control, and all that people do is go to the temple, and that's very important. That's an important aspect of going to the temple, is comfort. But the rest of the stuff which you need for the next generation, the temples are not doing. So that if temples in North America were to create something like that, possibly that would become a template for temples in India, also to aspire to. And the other thing is, yes, the Vedic ideas are becoming strong all over the world, partly through yoga and directly through Veda itself. And for example, the whole Slavic world, which is most of East Europe, a lot of people in the Slavic world want to go back to their Vedic roots. As you know, before the Slavs were forcibly converted to Christianity less than 1,000 years ago. Their main divinity was called Shvetavid, which is a Sanskrit term, as beautiful a Sanskrit term as there can be. Shvetavid, the knower of light. Shveta here means light, the knower of light. Perhaps another name for Shiva, with 4 faces, just like Shiva's 4 plus Ishan on the top, 4 faces. And to the north was Swarga, to the west was Parjanya or Parkonis, as in Old Russian, and to the south was Lada, which is another Sanskrit word for earth, and to the east was Moksha. And they called it Mokosh and Svarog. Mokosh, Svarog, Parkonis, and Lada. Truly, literally, you know, as tatsam as the words can be. So a lot of people are going back, discovering their roots, not just for the sake of history, because that could be one romantic thing. Hey, we want to know what our forefathers did, or when before such and such historical event happened. But I think ultimately every human being wants to be free. And Hinduism, we may have forgotten it, Hinduism is the path to freedom. It's the path to obtaining that creativity. All creativity emerges out of freedom. And a lot of what we do is based on conditioned behavior. You know, we learn some math, then we apply that math. And somebody else could do it. But true creativity is sort of transcendental. And every human being has potential access to it. And people want to get that. People want to see that mystery and magic, that chamatkar of discovery. And how do we communicate that is the challenge that we have. And I hope HCI and other leaders of the community would be able to come up with something which would make it possible. I'll just stop here, and then depending upon if there are any questions, we can go further.
Are there any questions on the bridge?
Yes, I do have one.
Go ahead. And then Nagesh, you're next. Go ahead with your questions.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Kakji, for so beautifully elucidating this. Half of this I can't understand, but it's so fascinating. I did go through your links that you had given us, but right here, I might be asking a very unfair question given the vastness of this topic, but you did say about how to keep it going. And I was just wondering if you would be able to shed a tip or two for me for succinctly bringing the importance of consciousness or the depth of it to 16, 17-year-olds. I teach 11th grade students, and this is a concept that's coming when we talk about the aspects of Brahman, Satchit, and Ananda, and trying to, I should say, not conceptualize it, but any tip that you can give me for that, I'd appreciate it if it's even a fair question in this forum.
No, it's a wonderful question. Well, I did mention that we need different ways of inspiring people at different ages, right? When you're in your teens, your focus is different, our senses are operating differently. But I think one powerful help is this whole idea of questioning. Ultimately, what's great about Sanatana Dharma, which the great English novelist who himself called himself a Sanatan Dharmi, but used a different term for it. Perennial philosophy. I'm talking of Aldous Huxley. He called it perennial philosophy, right? So the whole heart of Sanatan Dharma is also questioning. This is what we have to encourage children, because where we become Pashu is where, and this is what happens to people in many cultures, right? Because we don't let people ask questions. All questions should be open, because it's through those questions that the doors of the mind open up. But of course, we've got to do it nicely and discreetly, and there are certain things which, you know, and that's part of the challenge of the teacher. But surely, the very basic question, you know, why is a computer not conscious, and why are we conscious? And we are also machines. That's why we need to, sometimes we have an injury to the brain, we need to go to a doctor. And a doctor is like a mechanic, like neurosurgeon. He wants to sort of fix up certain circuits in the brain. But so where is this mystery? So we have to emphasize mystery. Hinduism is also a mystery religion, if you use that term, which is why some people are opposed to it. You know, there are two models. One is the machine-like model. Everything should be according to rules. And all ideologies are machine-like, like AI-like. But real life is not AI-like. And we see, each one of us knows it in our own personal lives. We are not machines. We have all these opposites. We have that manthan, samudra manthan, you know, the asura, the asuric and the daivic things within us. The asuric represents materiality. We are also bodies. You know, we can't say that we are not bodies, we are only mind. That's being too airy, and then that's not going to work. We are both. And how do we then do that? Through sadhana. I think a 16-year-old would be totally inspired by it and would see the beauty of it in a minute.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Nagenji, you're next.
Namaste, Dr. Kakji. It's such a wonderful discourse.
Nagenji, are you on two devices? There's an
Yeah.
echo on your line.
Yeah. Sorry about that. No, it's a wonderful discourse that you're providing for the last an hour or so. I'm so thrilled to be part of this discussion. My question at this instance is, I know this is this may be totally an unknown area, because we are talking about the consciousness. There is this there is a verse that's given by Adi Shankaracharya about Purnatvam. That is, everything is within the Supreme, or everything is within the consciousness. And anything that that has come out of consciousness is also part of the consciousness. Purnamidam. So, has there been any scientific approach to substantiate the entire physical universe, that as we see and experience is just a wheel that is that is within the completeness of the consciousness that exists out there, or is the only existence?
Yeah, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, you know, if you're talking of consciousness, and consciousness is one. It's not two. It's not many. That's why Shivaha Aham, Shivoham, right? There's only one Shiva. So it's Purna. So it's within each individual. It's Purna. From this comes all the multiplicity, who are also Purna. So it's that paradox that one is talking about. Now, of course, mathematicians also sometimes take a look at it and say that we are talking of infinity, that if you subtract infinity from infinity, you still have infinity and so on. And you can do it so many different things with it. But as I briefly mentioned, Schrödinger, when he looked at the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, that gave him the clue that the quantum mechanical state should be a superposition of all possibilities. Within our mind reside all possibilities, which is the reason why we are able to empathize with even animals when we are watching a documentary, for example, right? Documentary on animals or anybody or other human beings, or watching a movie. Why are we able to empathize? Because we are able to connect with the individual who's a part of that show at that moment. And so in that mysterious sense, everybody resides within us. Do you see that? So I think everybody accepts it. I don't think there's any complication or difficulty as this being outside of philosophical discourse. This is the very heart of the thinking, the starting point of the darshan within the Indian tradition.
Yeah. Thank you, Subhash.
Thank you. Rita ji, your hand is up.
Mr. Kak, namaste. My name is Rita Shat, and I think we met a few years back in a Hindu Parishad in Chicago, as far as my knowledge is telling me. But my question is, it's excellent way you explain, and it make more clear with the consciousness, and consciousness is one, and it's excellent. Thank you so much. My question is, we are teaching the Bal Vihar, Hindu Bal Vihar, and we have a teenager kids. And right now, last 2 years, we are teaching them Gita, Bhagavad Gita. So the way you said, is it better to teach or more efficient or more outcome can come if we can go with the questions and answer or something like that, or we should teach them with the textbook? Can you just let us know a little bit about it, please?
Oh, there's so many different ways of doing any of this. That depends on the teacher and the students and what the student's expectation is. And sometimes, as I mentioned, scientifically established, chanting itself can be a wonderful thing. You know, it expands the brain, physical brain.
Yeah, we do that,
cognitive aspect. So chanting is a wonderful thing. Questioning is also, because people also tend to lose track of what's going on. Mind gets distracted. Mind is like a monkey, right? As everybody knows. So how do we get the students back on? So you have to make them participate. And one way of making them participate is to make them give small presentations or have them ask questions or have discussion, and you are one of them in a discussion. As they say, it's in satsang. You know, satsang is when we're having a free conversation. That knowledge arises from somewhere. We don't know where, because then everybody is open. And that's what we need, even in a classroom. If you can do it, that'll be a wonderful thing.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. We'll try it that way.
Thank you, Rita ji. Professor Kak, you talked about the difference between intelligence and consciousness. And you said computers can be intelligent, but you don't think that that they can necessarily be conscious. Could you talk more about that? From what is the Vedic point of view on, you know, the distinction between pure consciousness and intelligence?
Right. Okay, in Sankhya, for example, you have Chitta, which is your memory bank. Then you also have Ahankar, which is ego, right? A computer is a memory bank. It doesn't have an ego. So the whole question is, where does this ego coming from? Ahankar, the sense of self. Ahamkar, right? The sense of self, where that coming from? It can't come through connections. You know, people do, there's a lot of what is called naive thought in scientific circles as well. You talk to the leading computer scientists, what they say is, or philosophers of computation, they say at a certain point, when the number of interconnections between the various chips increases a certain threshold, suddenly a computer will become conscious. That's too naive, simplistic, that's sort of childish. So where does ahamkar coming from? And that is, we are memory bank, and clearly if our memory gets damaged, and it can be damaged through a stroke or through brain injury, then clearly the quality of our understanding and cognitions will be impaired, right? Will change. But aham, that sense, where does it come in from? That is the mystery of self, and that's where Atma Vidya, what is Atman? Atman is that sense of self, and that is the mystery. And just imagine with what clarity was this expressed right in the beginning, certainly in the Upanishads, certainly even in the Rig Veda. So all of this was mentioned and then re-articulated in different forms, as in various Shaivite traditions, and they are the same because Shiva and Vishnu are two aspects, they're two ways. Hari Hara, for example, is the conception which was very powerful in Southeast Asia and within India itself. And there was also this conception all over Central Asia and China. In fact, I should tell you, because many of you may not be aware, that the Buddhists worshipped Maheshwara and Buddha at the same time. And in fact, one of the most popular chanting that is done in the Mahayana temples in all of Asia is called Nilakantha Dharani. Nilakantha, as you know, is a name for Shiva, and it's a Sanskrit chant. They're chanting in Sanskrit. They don't chant the Vedic three tones. They chant in a different way, but it's a Sanskrit dharani, Sanskrit composition, and you might want to look it up. And it's a dharani supposedly composed by Avalokiteshvara, which is the most perfect Buddha, Bodhisattva, right? Where he's worshipping Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is the main divinity that is worshipped in all of China. And in fact, in its female form, the image of Guayin, that is Avalokiteshvara. So in this, Avalokiteshvara himself is worshipping Shiva as Nilakantha. And as you know, Buddha is supposed to represent compassion or karuna. So here, Avalokiteshvara is praising Shiva for being the most compassionate being there can be, because as Nilakantha, Shiva swallowed halahal poison at Samudra Manthan to save the universe. Do you see that? So that is the greatest act of compassion. In fact, Nilakantha Dharani also invokes Vishnu. We have forgotten all of this because somehow I think it's Aitreya Brahman Upanishad, which says that when one is asleep, one is in Kali Yuga. When one sits up, one is in Dwapar. When one stands up, one is in Treta. And when one walks, one is in Krita Yuga or Satya Yuga. So India has been asleep. We don't even know anything about the great power of Sanskrit. We are fighting, what the English did, and we have taken that, we have swallowed that hook. We are fighting over Sanskrit. 90% of Indians are given so much of negative thing about Sanskrit that they hate Sanskrit. They don't want anything to do with Sanskrit. While the rest of the world, even in Beijing and Shanghai, the Chinese are learning Sanskrit because the great texts of the Mahayana are in Sanskrit, and they were translated by Sanskrit scholars for over 1,000 years into Chinese language. So we need to go back to that space, and that's when we will attain that mastery. And in fact, Victor Meyer, he's the leading sinologist. He's a professor at UPenn. he's also a Sanskrit. He's also a student of relationship between Sanskrit and China. So he wrote in an essay that in the first millennium, because Chinese was a single tone language. So then as the interaction between China and India became very intense intellectually, as Buddhist books were written, were taken from India and translated, and other books also, Shaivite Sanskrit books as well. So they used Sanskrit to create multi-tonal words, do two tones and so on. And according to Victor Meyer, about 35,000 key words in China, 35,000 key words in Chinese are from Sanskrit. Do Indians know it? No. Do Indian scholars know it? No. Is any of this done in any Indian university? No. They don't know, whole of Xinjiang until it fell in 1006 to Islam, used Middle Indian languages, Gandhari, Khotanese, what is also called hybrid Buddhist Sanskrit. And I've done some work on it, and it's incredible, their connection, that this whole huge region was actually a part of Greater India, and we don't know about it. And when I wrote to a friend in JNU, they said, no, there is a Department of Central Asian Studies, but they only do modern politics. They don't know anything about ancient languages. And now it's so easy to do it. All that stuff is freely available on the internet. We had to do, we have to stand up and walk. Charai Veti. Which Aitareya Brahman says, ultimately. It says, these are the 4 stages. So Charai Veti, Chara Eva Iti. So keep on walking. That's when you obtain mastery over the world. And that's what is required of India, because it's universal knowledge. And we are sort of holding on to it as something it's sectarian. No, it is universal knowledge for the entire world. And we should, if we have it, we should give it to everybody.
Thank you, Subhash. I know, Geeta Ji, your hand is up. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. Namaste, Subhash Ji. When I read some your YouTube links, and it is really interesting, and they are making us to think so much inquisitiveness. And my question is, consciousness, shunyatva, and or egolessness. So are they both, all are same, or is there any difference in that one, please?
Yeah, I got it. Wonderful, wonderful question. Okay, so who am I? Am I, okay, like I can say, am I Subhash or am I Shiva? If I'm saying I'm Shiva, am I deluding myself? Is that craziness? Okay, you are both. We are both. We are mind, manas, and then we have Atman. It's the Atman or Shiva, the Prakasha, which lights up our manas, right? So it's so as it lights up, we manifest something, and then we sort of forget where the light came in from. So it's a dance between these two. There are these two aspects within each one of us. You see that? So we are both. We are both the constricted self, because the mind is constricted. Manas is constricted. Manas has only so much capacity, right? Manas is material. It's an antahakaran, it's an instrument of the inner world, of our inner space. But it's lit by an infinite source of light. That is Shiva. Right? So how do we let this light come through? Because what stops this light coming through is what we pride ourselves in, namely our ahankar. The moment you think or I think that it's I who am doing it, that's when the light stops coming. And so there is a paradox here. Creative people know it. It could also be expressed perhaps in the paradox of the flow. If you are in the flow, which is where you are not thinking who you are, you're letting go. You're making your ahankar, your ego go down, you disappear. That's when you get access. You see that? This is totally paradoxical. The more you think, Keno Upanishad says, he who thinks he knows it does not know it, right? The more you think you're doing it, you're not doing it. The more you are attached to the idea that I did it, the more it's taken away from you. It's that paradox.
Thank you very much for watching. Yes, though it is interesting and it is difficult to understand, but I will try to, I'm trying to link the, thank you very much.
You're breaking up, but on the internet, on academia, there was, I think in 2004, I was flying from Washington, DC to Houston, and suddenly in a flash, 18 sutras came to me. And I wrote them down, then I expanded them into a little book, and it's on the internet. It's also published as a book in Delhi, but the text is available, and it addresses your question. The book is called the Prajna Sutra, Prajna Sutra. If you Google it, it's on academia.edu. You can download the manuscript, and it speaks exactly of this. Where does intuition come in? Ultimately, whatever you do, whether you're a businessman, you're a scientist, you're a writer, you're a dancer, you have to have an intuition which takes you somewhere where nobody else had been. Do you see that? So where does that intuition, is that flash, is that light? Where is that light coming from? It's that prakash. It's that prakash which shines on something within you. And how do you let that prakash shine? That's the challenge. So you might get some more answers from that book, the Prajna Sutra.
Sure, sir. I will definitely go through that. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Kak?
So, Subhash, I have a question. Since this life, I will say, is small, is fleeting, let's say that. In the limited time we have, how do we explore consciousness and be in conscious living?
Well, this life has two aspects. One, which brings sorrow. This idea of limitedness brings us sorrow. The other, which is infinite potential, which brings us happiness. So these are, just previously I mentioned them, these are the two poles of the manas and the Atman. If you are stuck in the manas, then of course, it is sorrowful. Life is, as the great European novelists say, life is full of tragedy or, unhappiness. And if you think you're only your body, then it is full of unhappiness and sorrow. But I truly believe, and it would take a different kind of a satsang to communicate that to you, that we have infinite potential in front of us, that Shiva truly resides within us. So Sita ji, the answer is you have to let go and find that light within you. I'm sure you have it, or you have seen it, but hold on to it and let go and be, and have that shraddha, have faith that yes, because it's like a thread which sometimes fleetingly disappears, fleetingly comes and goes. So you have to have that faith, and it'll take you to all those wonders. In Kashmir Shaivism, the word that is used is chamatkar. You see this amazing stuff happening to you, and happening to everybody around you, because we are not really separated from people around us.
Very nice answer. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Can I ask one if we have time?
Go ahead, Atman.
Namaste, Subhash. Thank you very much. You did an excellent talk and excellent presentation. It was very touching. I have one question. I don't know if it is related to this. People ask most of the Hindu followers or Hindu believers to chant mantras like Vishnu Sahasranam, Lalita Sahasranam, and if possible, Rudra and those things. How do you think these things influence us in everyday life? Why am I asking this question is like, I have 2 kids who are both adults, and how do I influence them to get into this practice? Because we did not do it when they were little. So how do we do it now that they are older?
Well, that's always a challenge. I think chanting does help. It's a discipline. If nothing else, it's a discipline, right? One may not chant and one might obtain exactly the same insights. You know, it's not a prerequisite, essential, but it's something that helps. You know, it's like when we were young, sometimes we used to wonder, why is somebody fasting or not? But all that now I realize is a wonderful discipline. You know, it's easier not to fast, but if you impose a discipline on yourself, that's a wonderful thing. So I think it would depend upon your children, the situation. Ultimately, you know, why people chant is also because of the group they belong to. If you are part of a social group where people are chanting, say once a week, they're doing Vishnu Sahasranamam or whatever else, and there's also food and great conversation. I was part here in Stillwater, as part of a group, and people used to chant Vishnu Sahasranamam every week. And after the chanting, what wonderful conversation. It still resonates within me. So if you have conversation, great food, it's a whole package. Yeah, if you can do that, then that's a wonderful thing.
Okay, so it's very hard to make the adult kids to get into that routine. As little kids, it's easier.
Well, but they could form their own circle where there are other people who are doing this chanting, and not just chanting. There are other elements also, like food, for example, or whatever, or a conversation, or whatever else.
True. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I'd like to thank Professor Kak for wonderful lectures. You have given us a lot to think about, and I'm going to urge everyone in the class to visit the other links that we sent before the session to get more insights into the Vedic view of consciousness and how it relates to all the latest research in intelligence and how these two may never converge. So, Professor Kak, thank you very much for very graciously accepting our request and giving us this talk.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Sitaji, over to you.
Kailashji, and thank you everybody else for these wonderful questions. This is a lovely satsang because one never knows what one is going to say.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and my blessings to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sitaji, over to you. We are going to take a 20-minute break, right?
Yes. I don't know if Panditji wants to come a little early. Do you think we have about 5 minutes extra, Gauravji? Do you know what time he wants to join?
I know he'll join 5 minutes early, but let's plan to be back at 4 Pacific, and that way we have a 20-minute break.
4 sounds good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at 4 o'clock.
But we don't want to go.
Now we can talk, Maha. I'm just reading your whole chat.
I know.
There are a lot of Chinmaya. I think there are some Balvihar teachers and some Balvikas teachers. So I know it, and of course parents with teenage children, young children, teenage children, and adult children. And so many nice questions, of course, you know.
Wish we could have more time with Subhash Sitaji. I want to have really. I want.
Now we need to. I think we have those videos, right? And all that.
Yes,
So much
yes.
material on Academia. If you have
True.
seen it, you know. So it's a lot we can.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Ma
Thank you.
and Geetaji, I know you're also interestingly, I was also relating with the man and the body, like the panchakoshas, you know, because I'm doing actually study group with the Atma Bodh. I mean, if you want to go on a break, I understand.
Oh, I love that.
that's fine.
Yeah, I
I
love
don't
that.
want to. I
It's
don't want to
fine,
take your
Sitaji.
time if you're going for a break. I can call you anyone, Maha, you know, of course, or Geeta. So this is what. So doing Atma Bodh, and that has so much to talk about Atma Vidya. You know, like how.
Is it a separate course, Sitaji, or is it separate?
No, I'm with Chinmaya Mission Sharanagati. We have a study group. That's where I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Atma
in
Bodh
Seattle.
is
We are doing
wonderful
on
book.
Zoom.
Yeah.
We are doing on Zoom only. We used to meet physically.
Sure, I will definitely join.
Yeah, so the Tattva Bodh is the first text we have to do before Atma Bodh. That's also Adi Shankaracharya's. This is commentary by Swami Chinmayanandaji's. So same again with so it's very, very fascinating, you know. I mean, the more and more we think, like how you know, Nageshji, he said about Om Purnamada. So you know, the whole thing is one. I wanted to say, just between us, that you know, I think of Om Purnamada as a piece of cake, and you know, we are a family of a cake. Even a piece, you know, every crumb of the cake has the whole taste, right? The taste of the whole cake. You can eat it whole, or even from the small, you can get the satisfaction, a piece of pie or cake. You can have the satisfaction of eating the whole cake. So it's like the world, if you experience even one aspect, it is the whole aspect of the world is touches you. Same with our family unit. We have family of 4 or 3 or 4, and anyone is affected, you know what I mean, you know, anything, they're happy, your whole family is happy. I mean, just about our unit, right? And then same with the world. If everyone is happy, we are all happy. If someone affects anything, then we are all get affected.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Such a Om Purnamada, Om Purnamidam in daily living.
So true.
That's why we say that Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu. That's what.
Yes, absolutely. That's my daily prayer.
Thank you to the
And
team
Om
for bringing
Purnamada
this.
and Om Purnamada is my daily prayer.
Yes. That is always, you know, we can do thesis on that one. It is always creating one or the other inquisitiveness questions with us.
Yeah.
Always, there is no ending for that, you know, small, though it is a small one, everything is in that one.
Yeah, very small sloka, but full of meaning. Oh, yeah.
Thank you to your team for bringing this to us. I know everybody's on
It's
a
all
break. but
Gauraji
really
who's
very,
done this
very
invitation.
inspiring.
Yeah, very inspiring talk. It's Gauraji's and Kailashji's initiative.
I'll be back.
Yeah, I'll be back. Yeah, I'll be back 5 minutes before. Yeah. I hope everybody's here. We only have 19 participants. We just wait for 1 more minute, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we have the slide open for the homework assignment, so people can start reading, whoever is here.